Thank you. And welcome back to, what panel is it? The third or fourth one? I'm losing track. My name is still Katarina Tracz, the same as this morning. However, I will briefly introduce our other panelists. First of all, Heather Conley, who is here from Washington, D.C. Magnus Nordenman, also flew here from Washington, D.C. And all the way from Kista, Mike Winnerstig. So Heather will start with a short speech, approximately 20 minutes, after which you will hear comments from Magnus and Mike. And then we'll have a discussion between us before I open up for questions from you guys. So please, Heather.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here in Stockholm. Mats, thank you so much for this wonderful invitation. You have given me an enormous task to try to answer what the future of NATO will be in Europe, particularly at this very monumentous occasion. You know, as I was reflecting on this presentation, I was thinking, well, if I would have given this talk before February the 21st had happened, after the agreement collapsed and events began to unfold, it would have gone something like this. So 6 months before the NATO summit in Cardiff, the US had absolutely no idea what we want from NATO anymore. NATO's future would mean a whole lot less of US leadership. We would be largely absent. I think we would wrap up Afghanistan, so we'd want Cardiff to be a little bit more focused on a happy conclusion from Afghanistan. Obviously, the first round of elections that just took place, the runoff will be on June 3rd to say that is success. The alliance has helped Afghanistan stabilize. We'd announce whatever resolute support would look like if, in fact, the BSA, the follow-on base support agreement, would be signed. You'd also see a NATO statement that would try to paper over the continued gap in capabilities in the alliance, the imbalance of the alliance. And you'd hear some talk about partnership. There'd be some sort of it's like a frequent flyer card, a gold card, a silver card, a platinum card. If you're a frequent flyer and you have this many miles and exercises with NATO, you get to be in a preferred club, something like that. It would have really been yet another missed opportunity for NATO, quite frankly. And if anything, the United States was looking at Europe as a place to decrease the amount of money that they spend. I think combat brigade, the two remaining combat brigades in Europe, were prime real estate to help reduce costs first. And I think, again, you would have seen a fading of US presence in Europe, intellectually as well as physically. And then the crisis in Ukraine happened. So everything has changed. Today, as we speak, US soldiers are arriving in Estonia. I never thought I would see that. They're already in Latvia, thank you. And Lithuania. We are there. Yeah. Poland. Well, they were already there in Poland, but we're reinforcing, absolutely. U.S. aircraft are coming in theater, Poland, as well as the Baltic states, with Allied aircraft, with German aircraft, Eurofighters, I would hasten to add. The first Article 4 occurred at NATO that talked about the threat from the east. All previous Article 4 commitments had come at the request of Turkey to look at the south, whether that was Iraq or Syria, first for the east. So an enormous amount has changed. And I think what you're going to see is that NATO, after 13 years of out-of-area operations in Afghanistan, NATO is returning home. And it's returning to its original collective defense mission. NATO is coming to the Baltic region in a very robust way. So let's try to catch our breath and understand what has happened, what has changed, what is at stake. And I think the last several days, for me to be in Tallinn at the Leonard Mary Conference and being here, I'm so appreciative. I've heard from those closest to the region the the most preeminent experts on Russia. I've heard their voices, and they're in my head. And so for many of us that traveled together from Tallinn to Stockholm, please forgive me, you're going to hear some reoccurring themes that I learned in Tallinn, to be sure. Here's the toughest part that we all have to overcome. 25 years of our attempts to integrate Russia into the West have failed. Full stop. Russia is now an adversary. We are not going to return to normal. And this is failure on a massive scale. We're working to get Russia into the WTO, to the G8, the NATO Russia Council. We were even working before the crisis on OECD. We were trying. Mr. Putin has put an end to that. And I look at policy failure as something akin to a grieving process, and we're told that there's 5 stages of grief. First, we deny that this can possibly be happening. Then we get really angry. Then we bargain with it. Then we fall into a depression. And then the phase 5 is we come to accept it. We accept where we are. We sort of move between denial, anger. I would argue the Geneva Accords was an attempt to bargain with it. I hope we don't fall into a depression. And I think we need to get to acceptance as quickly as possible. But I'm watching in Washington how we internalize policy failure. And it goes something like this. First, we blame ourselves. This is what we get. We've done this. We expanded NATO. We did Kosovo. We did Iraq. We have done everything to humiliate Russia. And now this is absolutely understandable why Mr. Putin is doing this. We blame others. We blame you. Eastern Partnership. Here we go. The EU did not know what it was doing. It was a technical project. They fell into this unprepared. The dependency on Russian gas has led Europe to be vulnerable. The lack of defense spending, you're just vulnerable. You invited this. Or we blame Mr. Putin. I go for the third. I focus on Mr. Putin's culpability. But I do recognize lots of mistakes were made along the way. So first we have to, and you may not agree with me, and that's fine, we have to accept the policy that we've been striving for 25 years is over, and we've got to create a whole brand new one. And what is at stake? The future political order in Europe is at stake. The future international order, as it is embodied in the United Nations Charter and the Helsinki Final Act, is at stake. I believe that Vladimir Putin seeks to restore the Russian Empire of the 18th century, not of the Soviet Union. And this is based on the primacy of ethnic Russians and orthodoxy, or conservatism, is in a broader sense. And this is probably at its most dangerous. I think what we have seen since the Russian-Georgian conflict in August of 2008 is that we have seen Russia militarily modernize to a sufficient level where Putin is able to execute large troop mobilization over long distances at great speed. We saw this in Zapad exercises last fall, and we obviously see it in the mobilization today. Russia is enhancing its nuclear deterrent, and the Russians practice using their nuclear deterrent. Again, we saw this in Zapad 2013. They're practicing with it. Russia will use its considerable influence in Europe through corruption, the media, financial networks, and political parties. They go where they are the most vulnerable. I thought Ed Lucas's point about BP was interesting. I think the Russians just bought 10 billion euros of influence in Hungary with the Paksh agreement. Everybody is exposed to this, but Europe and we in the United States, quite frankly, completely underappreciate this. And I think Europe needs to not only appreciate it, but beginning to prepare an antidote against it, because it will be used. I believe the situation will only get worse. And what we're seeing with these OSCE observers should again reinforce that this will only get worse. There will be a significant instability leading up to the May 25th elections, if those elections can take place. If those elections take place, and if Poroshenko is elected, there will be massive instability after he is elected to ensure that Ukraine fails. So this isn't going away. So now let's answer the question. So what is NATO's future in Europe? Well, let's start at the September 4th, 5th NATO summit in Cardiff. New ballgame. So what I told you, what I thought would happen before February 21st, let me tell you what I think is going to happen at Cardiff. It's the same people that are going to be working on the NATO policy statements and the communiques are the exact same people in Washington that are working 24/7 on the Ukraine crisis. They are exhausted. They haven't slept in 3 months. And they're not able to give adequate attention and time to summit preparations. So I think we have to be modest, and I think this also is universally true, I think, in most European capitals. We have to be modest that, we're not going to solve the world situations at this NATO summit, but I think it has to launch a process moving forward. So this is what Heather Conley believes should happen at the NATO summit. So take that with the grain of salt that it's provided. I think the most important thing that will come out of Cardiff will be a strong and united statement from the 28 allies about what the alliance is facing. And I hope it has a whole bunch of what I just pointed out to you prior to this. It is clear, it is declarative, it is not hedging, it is not hoping, it is clear, it is crisp, and it analyzes the situation accurately. And then there also must be a very strong statement of support for the people of Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia, for them to be able to have the right to choose their political, their economic, and their security orientation. There will be a complete renewed focus on collective defense, as I mentioned. I think the alliance will start off a process to examine the permanent basing of facilities in Central Europe. It needs to be assessed. It needs to be considered. We know the forces that the U.S. has sent will be here through the end of the year, but it is a time and a moment to consider whether we need to do that or not. And then, of course, the first thing that comes out is the 3 no's and the commitments that we said we would never move this. Well, Mr. Putin hasn't followed his commitments. This is about providing strategic reassurance to our Central and Eastern European allies. And to do that, we have to consider this as a possibility. You are going to see heightened exercise and training schedules in this region. I think you're already seeing commitments to increase in defense spending. This will also include the U.S., by the way. And this is my little asterisk. The rhetoric out of Washington has been fine. It's been strong, and it's been clear. I know we're going to get serious when we actually have to readjust our defense budgets, because we were anticipating cost reductions in Europe. We weren't anticipating rotating forces in the Baltics and Poland. We weren't anticipating, those combat brigades aren't going to go anywhere. We haven't anticipated actually putting more support in this, and we're going to have to adjust ourselves. And that's not going to be easy for us, as it is not easy for Europe to look at how it's going to increase its defense spending. I hope that other NATO countries join the U.S. in stationing forces in the Baltics, in Poland. This is my message to my German friends, my British friends, my French friends, and my Italian friends. We all need to join in this message of solidarity. And perhaps my most controversial recommendation for what happens at Cardiff is that NATO actually has to reassess its deterrent policy right now. This is something we haven't done. We have attempted it several years ago, and we sort of said, we'll just keep it the way it is. Let's not touch it. It's a little too, there's no consensus right now. Let's leave it as it is. We have to reassess it. We have to reassess it. So what I would do if I was Mr. Stoltenberg, as he assumes the position of Secretary General of NATO, I would seek a commission very similar to the Harmel report of 1967. I would immediately, and I call it the Stoltenberg report, but there's already a Stoltenberg report. We can't use that twice. to have a senior level group that is going to rapidly report to the Secretary General, to the North Atlantic Council on this complete package, to make some very forward-looking recommendations, to get this out of the political channel in its first instance, but to do a rapid assessment. What the Harmel report did to détente is what this commission or this report or this process needs to do to launch NATO into its new phase. So Afghanistan and the future of out-of-area of operations will be diminished for the time being. This is not happy news to our French friends who believe their threat lies in the Sahel. Capabilities will now focus on collective defense. There's some good news and some bad news in that story. There's some good news that Europe does have territorial defense, per se, but we haven't been focusing on that in a while. We do need to keep full spectrum capability. We need to keep crisis management. And we will use crisis management capabilities in the current context, but there does have to be a renewed focus. And quite frankly, for the last 15 years, we really haven't done this very much. And here's my message to you. I think partnerships in the larger extent may be diminished in this immediate phase. I think it is a very, very big open question, but it will be the one that's the most focused on, I think, in Cardiff, is the question about future membership prospects for the aspirant countries. I have mixed feelings about this myself. There has been an open door policy in NATO for many years, which has been in reality not open. We have to change our language, but we have to be in solidarity with those who seek a closer relationship with NATO, but not artificially promising something that the alliance cannot deliver. I'd like us to focus more on the relationship than quite frankly, the membership question. But I come out, I'm probably erring on the side of making sure the political messaging to Tbilisi and Kiev is the right messaging for the immediate future. So I'm going to be very cantankerous and controversial and said, the question I shouldn't be asking is what is the future of NATO in Europe, is what is NATO's future in Sweden? Because Sweden has a lot of important work to do when it's assessing the regional threats and what this means to Sweden's defense. Swedish political leaders, and who I know are very busy at the moment preparing for September the 14th, will need to make some policy recommendations and statements, because this issue is not going to wait until after the Swedish elections. It is an issue for today, and it directly impacts Sweden's national interests and its security. Sweden is going to have to determine whether it's ready for this period of geopolitical instability. Sweden's engagement with NATO will be different moving forward if in fact, if you agree that partnerships may be diminished. Sweden is not going to engage with the same NATO. We're not going to do as out-of-area operations. We're going to stick closer to home. And this is where Sweden is going to have to decide what's in its best interest to do. And only Sweden can make this decision for itself. Even though I know Ambassador Brzezinski has some strong views on this matter. Many in Sweden may welcome the fact that NATO has maybe a diminished presence or activity in Sweden. Some in Sweden may actually fear this change, because I think there's some that believe that, here's the analogy that a Norwegian colleague gave to us in Tallinn, which I want to share with you. Norway's relationship with the EU is similar to Sweden's relationship with NATO. So Norway plays all the rules in the EEA without the benefit of being at the table. They're the best EU members that there ever could be. And the same analogy is with Sweden. Sweden is the best NATO member. They work with us, they partner with us, but they're not at the table. We don't have to argue with them, and they're not a part of the NAC. That is fine if, again, the situation warrants that type of relationship. But Sweden is not a NATO member. Sweden is not going to be protected by NATO. And I think the wake-up call of last April on the Good Friday, a wake-up call, was Russia testing regional vulnerabilities. And Sweden failed the test. Russians also try to do incursions into our air identification zone all the time too. They're always testing. So the question is, the next time you are tested, will you be ready? And that is only a decision that the Swedish people and Swedish political leaders can make. I close with this, the final question, sort of from an analyst perspective. You know, this seems very sudden, and we are all very shocked by what has happened and what has transpired and the rapid speed. So I've been sort of scratching my head trying to think, what, you know, as an analyst, we're supposed to predict this. And we know that the Latvian defense minister predicted this last year. I'm sorry I wasn't here to listen to that prediction. It may have helped me a little bit in my analysis. I'm going to trace this back to 2007, when Putin gave a pretty big stem winder at the Munich Security Conference. And he said, boy, oh boy, this, I'm paraphrasing pathetically badly, you think you guys can take a lot of advantage of us when we're weak in this humiliation. Nope, this is not going to stand. So I agree. Read Mr. Putin's speeches. And he's been giving us some very powerful, and he's very transparent. What we tend to do, like we have done in the past with our Central Europeans and our Baltic colleagues, is we say, tut, tut, that's for domestic audience. He doesn't really mean it. Oh, tut, tut, don't be paranoid. We're so postmodern, we're over that. Well, after 2007 came 2008, of course, the Bucharest summit, the Georgian-Russian conflict. I can argue in 2007 that little seabed flag planting in the Arctic was sort of part of the, I'll show you. Then in 6 months after the Georgian-Russian conflict, the Obama administration reset the relationship. So if you think about it, Russia violated the territorial integrity of Georgia, and that was our fault, by the way. Mr. Putin didn't have anything to do with that. That was our fault because of this hideous thing we did at Bucharest.